Okay, everybody, I want you to welcome Ronald Muchemwa from Zimbabwe. Are you from Harare?
Yes, I'm from Harare.
And we're going to discuss today some monumental events in his country, Zimbabwe, where the opposition leader, Morgan Tsvangirai, just passed away. We also saw in South Africa, the neighboring country, the resignation of Jacob Zuma. So 2018 is going to be a very monumental year for Southern Africa. Also, Cape Town is undergoing a crazy drought that's in the news all over the world. So we'll see how much of that we can get done because Ronald has sort of a connection issue over there. And then maybe we'll pick up next week if necessary. First of all, Ronald, we tried earlier, but it kind of faded out. Could you describe your experience living under President Mugabe and basically your personal history I mean, you're a Zimbabwe native, so what's your personal experience living under President Mugabe?
Well, I'm 31 years old, so I was literally born after independence, and we are what they call the born free in Zimbabwe. We're born after independence, so all that we know was the former president Robert Mugabe. Went to school formally. I'm a journalist by profession. I'm a filmmaker as well. I studied film and television. Things were never okay for my generation because we are people that are said to have been born after independence. So our opinion sometimes really does not matter because we do not know the struggles of the war. The war they call the Chimurenga War or the Second Chimurenga because to get rid of the colonialists. So sometimes you might have an opinion, but it's not really valued because of the way we are perceived to be people that are born after the war, and we are usually called maybe lazy or more English than the rest of the country. So living under Mugabe, or when Mugabe was in power, it was a one-party state. And I would like to believe it's still a one-party state. Opinions, freedom of speech, that kind of thing was, as a journalist, I would go sometimes to get stories. And then when you get there and people start to tell you that this place, like illegal stands, for example, when people are getting settling in places where they're not supposed to settle. So these people will tell you that they were given this land by a certain ZANU-PF bigwig. So you could not report it. Even if you were to write a story, try to get it published in the newspapers, you couldn't. Try to get it on national broadcast, you couldn't. I worked for a prominent media house in Zimbabwe that was owned by, or that is still owned by, one prominent minister or ZANU-PF minister. So I access to get stories is there. Access to get stories was there, but to publish them and to get them out there during the Mugabe rule was impossible. You would know the journalist that went missing, Itai Dzamara, for saying Mugabe must go. Just a one-man march with a placard that said Mugabe must go, and he was abducted in a barber shop. And up until today, people don't even know where he is. So it was kind of like a scenario where intimidation was used. Freedom of speech could never be expressed, and you just had to pretend like you love the party and you love the president as well.
Okay, so I have I guess you could call him a friend, although I've never met him because he's in South Africa, named Rotendo Benson Matanya Rire, who's causing a lot of heat because he's a major supporter of Mr. Mugabe still to this day. Supported the third Chimurenga, which was with seizing the land of white farmers. So why would you say that Mugabe was responsible for this when people like him say it was the result of sanctions and British interventionism and American intervention and issues like that? Why would you say that Mr. Mugabe was responsible for it as opposed to outside factors?
The thing is, if you look at Zimbabwe's history since Mugabe's inception, Mugabe's entry into being the prime minister, the first prime minister of the country in 1980, he promised people a lot of things. He promised people land, he promised people jobs, he promised people education, healthcare, things like that. As time went on, Mugabe delivered a bit on his promises. Education, you see, education became widespread. People could go to school, multiracial schools, not only white people schools. Health as well. Some clinics, some hospitals were established in different various rural areas and other settlements early in the 80s. But when the country went just onto the 90s, they realized that they were just using up money without making money. So they had to make a choice. They had to make a choice either to come up with policies that could generate money for the country and sustain these health cares and this education they had promised the people, and find a way to compensate the farmers for land, etc. They came up with what they called the Structural Economic Adjustment Program, which was ESAP. And ESAP literally broke the country into bits, because you know what happens when you borrow from an international organization like the World Bank. They will have stipulated terms and conditions so that you can pay back that money. So government had to cut down on civil servant pays. They had to cut down on public services. So that meant that hospitals had to cut down. They cut down the funding in hospitals, cut down the funding in education, so that they could pay back that money. They borrowed something like 44 million. That was in 1992, 1993, the ESAP period. And that period as well, we had a drought. So in Zimbabwe, we experienced a drought at the same period. The government borrows money from the World Bank, and it becomes a situation whereby we do not know what that money was used for. Personally, I do not know. I was like in my third grade or second grade at that particular time, and we used to go to school and get food aid, like porridge from big pots, and we got like yellow maize and stuff like that. So after that, his popularities in these 90s were now going down. His popularity was now, he wasn't popular anymore, Mugabe, you see. So in roughly around 1990, the war veterans came in and they said to him, why have you forgotten the country? Why have you forgotten what you promised the people? Why have you forgotten us? Because up until today, they do not have a formidable structure of compensating the war veterans. War veterans get paid a monthly allowance of maybe from $50 to $100 or something like that. So it basically is nothing in Zimbabwe. So in 1997, they went to him, they marched to the State House, and they confronted Mugabe, and they told him, no, my friend Mugabe, you promised us something, and you need to give us something. We fought for the country, we don't have land, we don't have anything. This was unplanned for. So Robert Mugabe went to the Treasury, he went to the finance minister and the Treasury, and they signed out money payouts to give to the war veterans. Each war veteran received an amount of 50,000 Zimbabwean dollars in cash. And that money at that particular time was a lot of money. It was a lot of money. If we were to equate it to US dollars, it was right there in top of the 30,000s, 40,000s of US dollars, because the Zimbabwean dollar was very strong. So imagine a country which did not budget for this. This guy wants to keep his political power. His war veteran friends say to him, you have to see us, give us something. And straight goes to the bank, he withdraws money for every war veteran, and he gives them $50,000. This 50,000 was not used for anything productive, as far as I'm concerned, because some of the war veterans went and they bought cabbages to feed their cattle. You know, they did ridiculous stuff. They never had money in their life. So this was the beginning of mismanagement, clearly, of funds. So when this happened, our man, the former president, kept his political power up until 1999, and then 2000 when the elections came. Then you find now the leader of the trade unionist, the late, who recently passed away, Richard Morgan Tsvangirai, formed MDC, Movement for Democratic Change, because there was need for free and fair elections, because it was clear to everyone in the country that no one wanted these people. But how were they keeping on winning and keeping power? People will go and vote, but they will keep on winning. So we wanted a democracy to take place. Then Morgan Tsvangirai founded the Movement for Democratic Change in 1999.
So
then in 2000,
can we pause for? I want to get to that in a in a couple minutes. So what about the earlier issues with Mr. Mugabe, President Mugabe, and the Ndebele opposition in Matabele land, the Gukurahundi? I have the other person that I talked to. He believes that it was basically Mugabe putting down a rebellion. What's your perspective? I think you said you're a Shona. What's your perspective on that? Was he justifiably putting down a rebellion, or was that an abuse of power as well?
It goes both ways, because Joshua Mkomo, the leader of the ZAPU, was also in contending to the country. If you know Zimbabwe's history, the Ndebele people, the Matabele, they came from down there, from Chaka, the Zulu. If you know Dingiswayo and all that history, they came from there and they came to settle here. And the Kalanga, or the Zezulu, which now you might call the Shona, were the original people who were staying in Zimbabwe, Great Zimbabwe. So the Ndebele are a type of a tribe that is a warrior tribe. Unformidably, they are a war kind of a tribe. So they used to raid the Shona. They used to go and raid Shona, take the women, take the food, because in Matabele land it's a dry area. So down the country was more of the fertile area, but they couldn't come and settle there because there were people already there. So these people would come and raid and they would go back. If you know that history, then you would know that the Ndebele were the first-class citizens. They would call themselves the first-class citizens in the country. So they wanted to claim rights to the country, although they were the minority in the country. So this is how the rebellion came about when independence came. The ZAPU, they did not submit their weapons that they were using. Zipra. They did not submit their weapons that they were using in the war. And they used those same weapons now then to intimidate. They killed several white people that were still Rhodesians that particular time. They slaughtered villages, they killed women. Mugabe's response was basically, I can't say uncalled for or called for, but there was supposed to be a form of action to be taken. But the 5th Brigade was given the authority to then go and thrash any form of resistance. So the way they then carried out that exercise is that what maybe the international community would then want to say it was genocide and etc. But if that did not happen, civil war was apparent. It was going to happen, but it's not justifiable up until today that they cannot come out in the open and apologize. They cannot come out in the open and give us the correct figures of what exactly happened. We need this Truth and Reconciliation Committee that the current president has put in place. I hope it will serve the purpose to soothe the hearts of those that atrocities happened in their families, both from the Shona to the Ndebele. That's my opinion.
So would you characterize it perhaps as an overreaction that was an abuse of power, but it wasn't, I saw some of the figures that have officially been released. It seems like a lot of people, but it doesn't reach the standard of a genocide compared to other genocides that have happened in the past 50 years. But it seems just like Mr. Mugabe was abusing his presidential powers and consolidating everything within his own purview.
Right. Since Mugabe was the prime minister at the time and he had the authority to order the army to do anything, I think there could have been a better way to do it because he was the bigger brother. These were just dissidents and these were just, rebellious people. There could have been maybe a better way to do it. I do agree because he had all the arms of the country. He had to his disposal. He had all the weapons and everything.
And North Korean and Rhodesian advisors too. So
yes, you see what I mean. So I would agree with you. I would like to say yes. I would agree. To a certain extent, to a larger extent, it was abuse of power because he had the muscle, and I think it was kind of like a show off to just show the Ndebele that if you try anything, we can squash you. You see that kind of power that you put across and try to exercise the full wrath of your arm. Yes, so I do agree.
Okay, so I think we've given a fair assessment of both sides of the Gukurahundi issue, and I do want to come back to the issue of Mr. Tsvangirai, and I hope we're not running out of time because I do want to get to South Africa, but that could wait till next week if necessary. But
we just covered Tsvangirai now.
So Mr. Tsvangirai, what does he mean? His death, what does he mean for Zimbabweans? And would you subscribe to the idea that he was sort of responsible? Because I've heard somebody suggest this. He was responsible for some of these sanctions. Or do you think he was truly, a figure for democracy?
Mr. Morgan Tsvangirai was a figure for democracy in Zimbabwe because Mr. Tsvangirai is the first person to come out openly to oppose the ruling party, ZANU-PF. That we cannot take away from him. He was the first person to openly say Mugabe must go. He's the first person who came out openly to say these old people are ruining us and they are ruining our country. On the point of him being responsible for some of the sanctions, no, Mugabe did it to himself. It's just a situation where we want to point fingers. But due to the situation of the farm invasions, due to the situations of the bad language between the West and Mugabe, as you remember some of his speeches when Tony Blair was the Prime Minister of England, he would tell Tony Blair to keep his England and let him keep his Zimbabwe. Now, this was now personalizing a group, millions of people, to put them in his hands to say his heart does not care if there's people that are suffering as long as his grudge with Tony Blair meets his standards. So the sanctions, we could say Morgan Tsvangirai went to Europe or came to America to talk to the former George Bush or to talk to Tony Blair and talk about...
Ronald? I think we lost Ronald again. We might have to continue this different time. Let me see if I can raise him. If not, we're just going to reschedule for next week. But this was a good introduction for Ronald Muchemwa. And I want to give some context to why we were introducing him. There's been a little bit of a debate going on between me and one of our past guests, Mr. Benson Matanya Rire. And it's been it's been a little heated at sometimes, but basically there's a necessity that Zimbabwe, a country that was ruled by Robert Mugabe since 1980, has to move on from Mugabe's rule. He's not going to be in power anymore. He's in his 90s, but Benson believes that all of the actions taken to remove Mugabe from power were basically betrayals of the Pan-African vision. So we've talked a bit offline and discussed having a debate concerning this, concerning Mugabe, concerning South Africa as well, and concerning the idea that whites would return to Zimbabwe and to South Africa. I think Ronald's trying to reconnect, so we'll see if he can reconnect and how long he can. He has an issue with getting proper connection there in Zimbabwe. We've had that with a couple guests before, so I'm just waiting to see if you'll be able to reconnect. But in any case, I'm just going to continue giving some context. So the issue with South Africa and Zimbabwe is that many people are seeing the same protocol that Mr. Mugabe enacted in South Africa in the mid-90s and the 2000s, trying to intimidate white Rhodesians to leave their farms in Zimbabwe and give them to members of or citizens of Zimbabwe that are black Africans. So many are seeing the current turmoil in South Africa as following the same pattern. And Jacob Zuma, who is the recently deposed president of South Africa, as well as his successor, Cyril Ramaphosa, have both talked about confiscating white South Africans' land and returning it to the native people of the country, the native African people, black African people. And it's ignited a huge debate over what is the citizenship, who can earn the citizenship of the country. Can you truly, after 200 years, as some of these white Europeans are, or 300 years, become a full citizen of Southern Africa, of South Africa, or the African continent? And I think that those of you that are saying no, there's a lot of ethno-nationalists out there on both the white and black side. Those of you that are saying no, that white South Africans or white Rhodesians cannot, I'm just going to message him and see if he can get this message. So I just asked him if he could reconnect. If not, I'll close this discussion and we can try again to talk to him next week. I've had this, I think there might be some internet connection problems throughout Zimbabwe, issues because of the weather there and things like that. So we'll see. And hopefully next time we can actually because, we couldn't see him. I don't think I'm the only person who couldn't see him, but this is there's a major issue of how is citizenship established? Okay, is citizenship established based on ethnic and racial background, or is it established based on cultural and citizen requirements and expectations? In the United States, we traditionally do have people become citizens when they agree to, for example, swear to uphold and faithfully defend the Constitution of the United States. I think that's in the immigration vows. However, the American values on immigration and citizenship are not universal to the entire world. And South Africa in 1994, when it ended the social policy of apartheid, there were agreements in place to conserve the civil and citizenship rights of the white South Africans. But you have to take into account, by the way, that South Africa is not only a white and black society. First of all, there are several black nations of people within South Africa. You have the Zulu, the Xhosa. I can't pronounce their name properly, but it's the Xhosa, Xhosa. There's the there's the Tswana people in the north. There's I think they're called the Khoi in the northwest. There's numerous peoples living in South Africa of different ethnic groups and different language groups, and uniting them together in South Africa was a challenge in and of itself. Within the white minority population, there were British and Afrikaner South Africans. The British were obviously descended from people who immigrated from the British Isles and dominated South Africa it was a racist society. It was a class dependent society because they also dumped on the Afrikaners for many years. Before South African independence in the, I believe it was official independence in the 1950s, South Africa was basically a British dominated state. It wasn't just white, it was also British South African. And the Afrikaners in South Africa also felt that they were on the lower end of the scale. And when they eventually seized control of the state because they were numerically more superior than the British, they also enacted more of a pro-Afrikaans, anti-British, anti-English agenda. That's why they left the British Commonwealth. And Rhodesia had a similar history where they had to leave the British Commonwealth in 1961 because they did want to keep a majority white rule with no direct democracy for the black population. And that's how you got the situation today. And if you're looking realistically, they could not have held on to Rhodesia or South Africa if they would have enacted full voting rights at the time and respected the civil rights of the people there. And we're still not done talking about the ethnic breakdown, because, like I said, it's not just black and white South Africans. There's other groups too. But before I go on, so Rhodesia was mostly British immigrants to what's now Zimbabwe, who dominated the country for several years. I think it was from 1965 until 1980. Rhodesia was a pariah state. It was whites only leadership. The military was dominated by whites, and they had black supporters who basically viewed it as, you know, this is a better system than communism or you know, the Pan-African belief system that Benson, who is he's been our other guest, advocates. But, you know, it wasn't the wish of the majority of the population. So in 1980, after wearing them down, Rhodesia and the Zimbabwean African National Union and the Zimbabwean African People's Union, so those are two guerrilla groups that Ronald was mentioning in his in our dialogue earlier. Those two came to they came to an agreement. I believe it was the Lancaster House Agreement with Lord Soames, and Zimbabwe briefly reverted to British rule, and then Robert Mugabe won the election, and Zimbabwe officially became independent. There was also like a brief period called the Zimbabwe Rhodesia state, which was kind of a dual state, a one-state solution to the Zimbabwe Rhodesia problem. And it didn't work because the guerrilla groups didn't lay that down their arms. They said, oh, this is just a colonial state with a black face. That was basically their attitude towards the compromised state of Zimbabwe Rhodesia. So, you know, to round out the whole ethnic issue in South Africa, there are Indian immigrants and there are immigrants from East Asia who came there in the you know, during British colonial rule. And those groups, so the next question would be, if white people cannot be citizens of South Africa under this new wave of violence and you know, attempts to get them to leave, or there are some people calling to kill them, then what becomes next when the white people are gone? Are these Indian South Africans going to be afforded the rights that the Africans give to their other citizens, or is this going to be a continent where only African people can remain there? And I haven't addressed this issue yet with any of the people that are that, you know, I've had on, but this becomes a question then. Does Africa then become this ethno-state? And I'm talking about Pan-Africans. There's Pan-Africans out there like Benson, who believe that Africa can unite together and become a superpower. And in America, this is becoming a bigger and bigger topic because of the Black Panther movement and Wakanda and whatever. I would say that people who can't get along with other groups, other nations within Africa, and that this is clearly the case with Mugabe and with other, and by the way, Jacob Zuma, who was notorious for being a Zulu nationalist in certain ways. yeah, those people are not going to unite Africa. They could create some sort of military expansionist power or something, but I believe that when it comes down to the best way to rule a country, you need more of an open society. This ethnic solidarity thing, this racial solidarity thing, it has yet to prove itself in the real world. And some people, some people like to say that there's Richard Spencer, for example, who says, well, it hasn't been tried. And then you can cite states that have tried it, and they'll deny it. It's the same argument that socialists make about why there hasn't been a successful implementation of socialism or communism. In my opinion, those groups that engage in that type of rhetoric are, they're fantasists. They're utopians. I for one, I once believed in libertarianism as a philosophy, but I can't believe in it to the hilt. I can't be an ideologue. I have to believe that there are issues that you can't resolve through a rigid doctrinaire system of beliefs, even libertarianism. So that's it for today. I hosted this off air or offline because I did want to be able to see if I could get a good connection, which we couldn't. And, we'll try again next week to do this when Ronald has a better connection and everything. I hope you enjoyed whatever information we could get from him and some of his experiences growing up in Zimbabwe. And I hope that I rounded out some of the knowledge that maybe wasn't stated at the beginning, because we were kind of trying to do this on the fly. So have a great weekend. We're going to talk Saturday night to a couple people regarding obscenity laws and pornography. And, we'll see you then, and that'll be a live chat. So you'll get to really interact with us.